Imagine waking up one ordinary morning and feeling, with the clarity of a cold wind, that the life you assumed was yours is actually a carefully assembled performance. Not a secret plot stitched in dark rooms, but a system fashioned in broad daylight. Taught to you, repeated to you, accepted by you. It isn't loud. It whispers. It slips into language, into rules, into those tiny approvals and corrections that accumulate until they form a script. What the most dangerous lies in a scandal or a headline, but a soft narrative so familiar it passes as common sense. What if the story you live by has been edited by hundreds of invisible hands over generations, until you can no longer tell where your voice ends and the chorus begins? From the first sound you imitate, you are steeped in norms. Parents, teachers, friends, and strangers hand you a map of what counts as success, love, decency, or shame. These maps are useful. They help societies function. But they are also blueprints for control. Early on, you learn to accept praise when you follow the path and to shrink when you diverge. You are rewarded for compliance. You are corrected for curiosity. The mechanisms are not mystical. They're painfully ordinary. Behavioral psychology shows how repeated reinforcement shapes habit and then identity. The classroom, the workplace, the church, the feed on your phone. Each is a training ground where small approvals and quiet scorn accumulate into habits of thought. And it works. People build lives around these stamps. Careers are chosen to match expectations. Romances are measured against cultural ideals. Even private griefs are reshaped into socially acceptable stories. When you accept validation as a currency of value, you begin to measure yourself by external criteria. Your worth becomes a ledger of approvals. Who sets the exchange rate? Who decides which behaviors earn praise and which invite scorn? The answer is not one villain. It is a network. Institutions, industries, media, families, each nudging you toward predictable roles. Over time, the pressure to conform grows less like an outside shove and more like an internal compass needle that points to normal. This is where the big deception takes hold. It tells you your value depends on how well you fit the system, and that your success equals your productivity. It nudges you to equate worth with output, appearance, and possessions. Billboards, curricula, and glossy feeds all chant the same refrain. If your life doesn't match the billboard, you tighten the screws. If your inner voice suggests a different path, you silence it, not always because someone shouted, but because you learn to be afraid of being the odd one out. Rejection, ridicule, and obscurity become threats more terrifying than slow erosion of your sense of self. And so you tuck away discomfort. You learn to perform the part you were handed. Have you ever felt like an actor reading lines that don't belong to you? Chasing goals that were picked for you? That hollow ache underachievement. It isn't moral failing. It's proof of mismatch. Society is adept at turning dissatisfaction inward, convincing you that the fault lies within. You're not trying hard enough, not positive enough, not disciplined enough. Distress becomes a personal flaw rather than a signal that the system might be misaligned with your nature. This diversion is brilliant in its cruelty because it keeps the focus on self-improvement rather than systemic correction. You're busy fixing yourself while the structure that shaped you remains intact. And yet, the lie succeeds because it wears the clothes of truth. It looks like culture. It smells like tradition. It masquerades as safety. That is what gives it power and makes it so difficult to dismantle. But escape isn't impossible. Understanding the architecture of the system is the first move toward reclaiming autonomy. We don't need to invent rebellion. We need to remember that our minds can be awakened. The first step is recognizing that many of the signals you obey were not built for your flourishing, but for the smooth running of a predictable machine. Think for a moment about the role of stories. From bedtime tales to blockbuster films, stories are how people make sense of the world. Repeat a story often enough and it becomes a lens through which every new fact is interpreted. Consider the myth of meritocracy, the notion that hard work straightforwardly yields success. On its face, it's a heroic tale that encourages effort. Beneath the surface, however, it acts as a moral explanation for inequality. If some fail, they must have failed themselves. This story comforts those on top and disciplines those below. It personalizes structural failure into individual deficiency and discourages questions about access, inheritance, or unfair systems. Then there's technology, which amplifies the same dynamic. Mass media once synchronized millions around shared images and ideas. Today, algorithms customize influence by the pixel and the scroll. The platforms that promise connection teach you what to long for by curating desires into neat, clickable packages. Genuine individuality is monetized. Be Yourself sells best when yourself follows recognizable patterns that can be packaged and bought. Even rebellion becomes consumable aesthetic. Dress like an icon of dissent, share a ready-made slogan, and the industry will happily sell you back the image of independence. The result is a culture where the illusion of choice replaces the messy, terrifying work of real freedom. Words matter too. Language shapes thought. When terms are softened or sanitized, resistance becomes harder to imagine. Euphemisms replace sharp realities, so that critique loses its edge. Corporations and politicians often swap blunt truths for gentle labels, collateral damage for civilian death, restructuring for mass layoffs, and the consequence is that publics grow less outraged and more numb. This is not an accident. Streamline language for text systems by shrinking the space where dissent can take hold. If the vocabulary for dissent is whittled down, the capacity to imagine a different world is similarly diminished. But perhaps the most profound shift occurs inside you. Over years of external conditioning, you begin to police your own mind. Self-censorship is the internal mirror of social control. You quiet the instincts that might reveal an alternative life. Dreams are postponed, then diluted, then eventually forgotten. You teach yourself obedience so skillfully that freedom feels risky and disorderly. The most effective prison is the one with no bars, only habits, assumptions, and the polite voice that says, "That's not for people like us." When you internalize limits, you become both the inmate and the warden. So what breaks the spell? Not force, not sudden renunciation. Liberation starts with asking simple, stubborn questions. Whose life am I living? Which parts of my desire come from me, and which are handed to me? What would I choose if approval were relevant? Awareness is a first step, because the mind that knows its conditioning can also unlearn it. The key is not to reject society wholesale, but to reclaim the parts of yourself that have been ceded to convenience, fear, or habit. Reclamation begins with naming the stories that rule you and tracing them back to their makers. We are not fixed. Psychology tells us the mind is plastic. We can change patterns we inherited. But change requires intention. It asks for courage more than certainty. It demands honest inventory. Which beliefs are mine and which were purchased for me by others? Which fears belong to my story and which were grafted onto me by the culture around me? When you begin to answer, you create space to rewrite. You free desire from its consumer script and align your identity with inner truth rather than social imprimatur. This is not theoretical. In daily life, reclaiming your mind looks like small acts that accumulate, deciding on a metric of success that you define, treating fear as a signal, not an order, letting your curiosity lead even when it unsettles others. It means refusing the neat boxes offered by resume and role, and instead listening to the strange, persistent whisper that has always been yours. It is a process of reclamation, of mind, desire, identity, and then action. Choosing a life that reflects those reclaimed priorities, even when the chorus grows loud in protest. The greatest lie ever sold is the story you learn about your limits. The antidote is a steadfast insistence that you are not fixed, that you are not owned by expectation, and that authenticity is a practice rather than a one-time event. To walk out of the theater of other people's scripts, you must first recognize the stage. Once you can see the ropes and pulleys, they lose their magic. Awareness gives you a choice. You can continue to perform according to received instructions, or you can begin to rewrite the script line by line, claim small freedoms, and expand them. If something in you stirred while you listened to this, follow that stir. It might be memory, a recollection of what you once loved before being taught to want something else. Or it might be a question that refuses easy answers. Either way, keep listening. The path ahead isn't tidy. It asks for patience with setbacks and stubbornness in the face of small humiliations. But it is available to anyone willing to look and begin to choose now. Centuries ago, control was simple. Kings and emperors wielded power with swords. Priests claimed authority through divine decree, and disobedience could mean punishment or death. The lines were sharp, the consequences immediate. Fear ruled openly. But over time, rulers discovered that chains and threats, though effective, were crude. Far more efficient was a softer method, convincing people that the rules served them, that the order imposed was natural, inevitable, even righteous. Control shifted from the battlefield into the mind. Plato foresaw this in his allegory of the cave. Prisoners shackled in darkness, mistaking flickering shadows for reality. If one broke free and glimpsed a light, he was scorned or attacked by those still chained. Why? Because comfort in the familiar is more persuasive than truth. This is a genius of subtle control. Once the story is accepted, people defend it against anyone who challenges it. Society itself becomes the enforcer. The instruments of influence have always been stories. Religions told stories of salvation and damnation. Nations crafted myths of destiny and glory. Families repeated tales of honor and shame. Stories shaped morality, behavior, and belonging. To believe the story was to be safe. To reject it was to risk exile. Over generations, these stories hardened into culture, law, and common sense. What began as narrative became invisible architecture. Consider the story of meritocracy. It says, if you work hard, you will succeed. This idea sounds empowering, even fair. Yet beneath the surface, it disguises inequality. When someone struggles, the story implies the fault is theirs, not the system, not privilege, not structural barriers. By repeating this tale, society justifies disparity while absolving itself of responsibility. The myth comforts winners and silences losers, keeping both loyal to the system. Political thinker Noam Chomsky observed how modern media sustains this framework. The trick isn't in fabricating outright lies, but in shaping the range of thought. You are not told what to believe directly. Instead, the boundaries of acceptable questions are set for you. The unaskable remains invisible. In this way, the system doesn't need to crush dissent. It prevents it from being conceived in the first place. Then came the screen, first television, then the internet, now the algorithm. Never before billions absorbed the same stories at once, repeated in pixels and sound bites until they echo in our private thoughts. Media doesn't simply reflect culture, it manufactures it. Celebrities beam curated lives into your imagination. Influencers present scripted authenticity, and feeds deliver ideals in endless scrolls. You don't just consume entertainment. You consume models of desire, what to look like, how to live, who to become. Have you ever caught yourself comparing your messy, human life to a feed of polished moments and wondering, why not me? That feeling is not an accident. It is design. It is programming. The same system that shows you what you want also sells you the tools to chase it. Products, lifestyles, even personalities. Rebellion itself gets commodified. Be a free thinker by buying the shirt. Join the movement by posting the hashtag. Even dissent is folded neatly into market categories. Psychologist Carl Jung wrote about the collective unconscious, a deep reservoir of shared symbols and archetypes. Today, those same archetypes, hero, rebel, lover, sage, are packaged into movies, campaigns, and brands. The sacred desire for purpose and belonging becomes a marketing pitch. Spirituality becomes logo. Activism becomes merchandise. Uniqueness becomes trend. The result is a world where freedom of choice feels abundant, but real freedom, the kind that risks social disapproval, is quietly discouraged. Even language becomes a tool of control. George Orwell warned of this in 1984, where stripped-down vocabulary, newspeak, eliminated words for rebellion. If you cannot say it, you cannot imagine it. In our world, the language is not so blunt, but no less powerful. Civilian deaths are called collateral damage. Mass layoffs are downsizing. Surveillance is data collection. When protest erupts, participants are branded as radicals, extremists, or unstable. Words reshape perception. A softened term dulls outrage. A loaded label delegitimizes dissent. Over time, this conditioning sinks so deep that you no longer need external guards. You become your own censor. You stop yourself from speaking the inconvenient thought, from entertaining the forbidden dream, from asking the dangerous question. You tell yourself, that's not realistic, or that's not how things are done. The control has been internalized. The invisible hand doesn't push you. It whispers and you obey. This is why the most profound prison is internal. Once you've absorbed society's definitions, you don't just follow rules. You police yourself, sometimes more harshly than any authority would. You dismiss your yearnings before they take shape. You shrink your imagination to fit the box marked normal. And in doing so, you surrender without realizing you've given anything up. Normality itself is a construct. What counts as acceptable shifts with time and place. But because it feels stable, people cling to it. To be normal is to be safe. To deviate is to risk shame, ridicule, or exile. And so most people comply. Yet inside, the whisper persists, a faint tug toward something truer, something freer. That voice is not madness. It is memory. It is a self before conditioning. The spark that remembers who you are beyond performance. The question is whether you will listen. Breaking free begins not with rebellion against society, but with reclamation of your own mind. Ask, whose values am I living by? Which desires are mine and which were planted? What fears are truly protective and which are cages? These questions do not dismantle the system overnight, but they loosen the grip. They reveal the strings. Once you see them, obedience feels less like fate and more like choice. You are not fixed. You are not a sum of your roles, your possessions, or your status. You are not defined by the lines someone else wrote. Your identity is not static. It is fluid, evolving, expansive. The lie wants you to believe you are confined, that your worth is conditional, that you must prove yourself through productivity and conformity. The truth is that you are already whole. Existence precedes essence. As Sartre said, you define your life, not the system. But to live this truth requires courage. It means embracing discomfort, risking disapproval, tolerating uncertainty. It means rewriting your story one choice at a time, even when the world insists you stick to the script. Liberation is not rejecting society entirely. It is refusing to let society define your essence. It is choosing alignment with your deepest values rather than the loudest voices. Awareness is step 1. Reclamation is step 2. Action is step 3. Awareness exposes illusion. Reclamation restores your inner compass, and action transforms your life into one authored by you. This is how you break free from the greatest lie ever sold. By refusing to measure your worth by standards designed to keep you obedient. By reclaiming your desires, your fears, and your identity as yours alone. The path is open. The question is whether you will walk it. The system wants you docile, obedient, endlessly chasing approval. But you are not small. You are not confined. You are limitless. The moment you see beyond the veil, you cannot unsee it. And that is the beginning of freedom. Every great deception has one final layer, distraction. The system understands that if you stare too long at the emptiness behind its promises, you will start to question. So it keeps you occupied with work that consumes your hours, with entertainment that consumes your attention, with endless noise that leaves no silence for reflection. When was the last time you sat in stillness without reaching for a device, without filling the moment with someone else's words or images? That restless urge is not weakness. It is conditioning. You have been trained to fear silence, because silence is where truth begins to emerge. The Romans called it bread in circuses. Feed the people, entertain them, and they will not rebel. Today the bread is cheap convenience, and the circus is digital spectacle. Sports, celebrity scandals, viral dances, political outrage, all engineered to keep the collective gaze diverted. The more trivial the distraction, the safer the system remains. What better way to prevent rebellion than to keep people endlessly busy chasing illusions that feel urgent but matter little? But distraction is not just external. It seeps inside. It teaches you to chase validation rather than purpose. How many likes? How many followers? How many views? A currency of attention replaces genuine connection. You begin to measure your worth not by the depth of your relationships or the truth of your character, but by metrics that can be counted and compared. And because these numbers never stop, your hunger never ends. The system doesn't need to chain you. You chain yourself with craving. Philosopher Eric Fromm warned of this trap when he distinguished between being and having. To be is to exist authentically. To have is to define yourself by possessions, titles, and achievements. Modern culture glorifies having. Own more, achieve more, display more. Yet no amount of having can satisfy the hunger for being. The more you pursue the external, the more hollow the internal becomes. And in that hollowness, the system thrives. A restless soul is easy to manipulate. Here lies the brilliance of the greatest lie ever sold. It doesn't just enslave you materially. It enslaves you spiritually. It convinces you that your salvation lies in the very system that drains you. Feel lonely? By connection through apps. Feel inadequate? By confidence through products. Feel powerless? By influence through status. Each purchase deepens the illusion. Each cycle leaves you emptier than before, yet still believing the cure is just one step away. But cracks appear. Always cracks appear. No matter how polished the illusion, reality presses through. You see a successful figure admit to despair. You achieve the milestone you thought would bring peace and find a hollow. You realize the approval you chase feels shallow the moment you receive it. These cracks are not failures. They are openings. They are invitations to step outside the script. And stepping outside does not mean abandoning life. It means reclaiming it. It means learning to sit with silence and hear your own thoughts again. It means questioning every should you inherited and asking whether it aligns with who you are. It means shifting from performance to presence, from conformity to authenticity. Freedom is not in escaping society, but in refusing to let it dictate your essence. But freedom has a cost. It will unsettle those around you. People invested in the illusion will resist your awakening. They may ridicule, dismiss, or even attack you. Remember Plato's cave. The freed prisoner who saw the sun was hated by those still staring at shadows. To question the lie threatens not just the system, but the comfort of those who depend on it. They would rather defend their chains and face uncertainty. Do not mistake their hostility for truth. It is fear disguised as certainty. History shows us that true freedom often begins as loneliness. Mystics, rebels, philosophers all face isolation before their visions spread. What feels like exile is often the birth of independence. And when you stand firm, you become a beacon. Others who sense the cracks but fear the leap may see in you the proof that life beyond the illusion is possible. Liberation is contagious. So how do you live beyond the lie? Not by grand gestures, but by small, deliberate acts of reclamation. Say no when the script demands yes. Choose rest over relentless productivity. Speak truth even when silence would be safer. Create without needing validation. Connect without needing transaction. Each act weakens the lie's hold. Each step restores your authorship of your own existence. Remember, the lie thrives on your forgetfulness. It survives only if you remain unaware. But once you see it, once you recognize the patterns of control, distraction, and conditioning, its power falters. You cannot unsee what has been revealed. That is why awareness is the ultimate rebellion. To awaken is to reclaim the right to define reality for yourself. And so the greatest lie ever sold is this, that you are small, dependent, incomplete without the system. The truth is the opposite. You are vast, capable of meaning that no system can contain. You are whole, even in imperfection. You are free, even in a world that prefers you obedient. The system does not grant you worth. You carry it innately. The choice is yours. You can remain in the cave, defending shadows, policing your own chains. Or you can turn, face the blinding light, and step into the unknown. It will not be easy. It will not be comfortable. But it will be real. And in that reality lies the freedom no story, no ruler, no system can ever take from you. This is the beginning of your rebellion, not against the world, but against the illusion, against the greatest lie ever sold.